Is this on? Can you guys hear me? No. No, not on.
Try again, Corrina.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah? That was it? Okay, the button. That button doesn't want to stay on. Hello? No? Button here that doesn't want to stay on. Does it work? It works? Hello? Hello? Do I have to talk like this? Okay. Okay, I'll talk like this. That's fine. Wow. Thank you, Catalyst, and for everyone that's here today to listen to these stories. And I think that what's beautiful is that that I'm here surrounded with these wonderful women and great storytellers. And I think that when women come together and they talk about their stories from their hearts, the stories that come out is stories that our ancestors want to be heard. And I think that what needs to happen is that we listen with our hearts, not with our minds. And so I think that when we talk about indigenous struggles, that's much what it is. It's about hearing it from the heart and allowing yourself to take it in. Much different than a Western idea of it's always in your head, right? I have this wonderful mentor that said that when you look at our skin color, we are the color of the land. We come from the land, that we are the people that were put here. So my ancestors have always been here as a part of this place. There's a funny thing, this word that folks have just recently, I really want to say that in the recent last 100 years, maybe even less than that, really started talking about genocide as a thing that happened, not just to Jewish people, but to many people, and continues to happen all over the world, to people of color, to people that are connected to the land. My ancestors were colonized 3 times really quickly. And although we talk about the colonization that happened a lot of times on the eastern coast of what is now called the United States, that happened 520 something years ago. But here in the Bay Area, it's been less than 250 years. My ancestors were enslaved first by the missions, the Spanish. And they came here and with this idea of taking the land, right? They didn't come here in hopes of saving these savage people, but to enslave the people that were here on this land in order to save the land from being taken from the Russians, who were encroaching on that land from north. Did I hang up? I think I hung up on it. When that happened, a lot of times when people are taught about the history of what happened to California Indians from the bottom of California all the way up to a little bit past here in Sonoma, we're taught that the missions came here with this great idea of saving these savages from themselves. For thousands of years, we're taught that my ancestors wandered about. And I wonder, what the hell does that mean? We wandered about. Wandered about doing what? Right? Like we had no thought in our minds, right? But that we were actually able to be self-sustaining. And we had sovereignty and language and music and religion and a connection to the lands that we are on. For thousands of years that happened before the Spanish got here with their Jesus, and with beating people, and with the mass murder of people, and rape, and the imprisonment of people. The first industrial prison complex was the mission system here in California. They came here without thinking that we were human beings because of the doctrine of discovery, which is still used against us. To say that we, as people of color, are less than human. That it allowed people to go all over the world where people of color were, and to take their lands because they didn't have any idea how to run those lands, because they were half human. People in the world are still using this doctrine of discovery by the Catholic Church against indigenous people all over the world. So colonization with the Spanish happened for about 100 years. In that time, they were able to wipe a lot of the language away, the way that we lived, the foods that we ate, all of those kinds of things that went away with it, the way we dressed. And I like to put this correlation between what is happening right now in our lands and what happened to my ancestors then. Because today we have so many of our brothers and sisters, our relatives living in tent cities right now. But they're still living. And that is their homes for this moment. And they should be afforded dignity in living that way because that is how they're living. And we should not turn a blind eye to that. But what happened a little more than 200 years ago when the Spanish came was that they believed that that was not a sufficient way to live with my ancestors. And through gun and sword, took us away from that form of living and put us into creating the prisons in which we lived, the mission systems. We haven't gotten that far from where we were 200-something years ago with the colonization that happened on these lands. Shortly after, the Spanish churches were having their lands taken from them, their lands that were stolen. Mexico came in and stole the lands from them. Took that land, and now it's called Mexico. First it was Spain, now it's Mexico, right? And Mexico took that land and gave that land to the gentries of Mexico. Huge swaths of land that still hold the name all over the Bay Area. You guys know Peralta. My great-grandfather, Jose Guzman, one of the last speakers of language, lived and died on Peralta land. So what happens is that you learn about these things, but you never taught about them in schools. So there was a whole war that happened. Mexico and America had a war. And they fought over these lands. And Mexico lost. And there was this treaty of Guadalupe de Hidalgo that was written. And in that treaty it said that the indigenous peoples of the lands were supposed to get some of the land to go back to. And what was now the United States agreed to that. And like the United States always have, lied when it came to treaties. By the time they got to California on the westward expansion, it was not about creating treaty with Indians anymore. It was about mass extermination. It was about killing off my ancestors and every other California Indian that existed. It was about creating laws which allowed $1.7 million to be paid by the federal government to kill off natives at $5 a head and 25 cents an ear, less than 200 years ago. It allowed for the slavery of Native California Indians to happen because Native California Indians could not say anything against a white man in court. It allowed for people to go into village sites and to kill off the adults and to sell the children at $200 a head for young girls and $75 for young boys. Until they became of age, 25 years for the young men, 30 years for the young women. It caused displacement of our children and our family structures. And less than 200 years ago, when all of this stuff you see outside and what is now called Oakland and the Bay Area was created. So we have to talk about genocide and what that means. And how is that a part of the colonization process? How are laws created in order to allow this to happen and to continue to happen? Because now genocide isn't just about outright killing people. It's about erasing them in your history books. It's not about allowing them to be human beings, because we are not a federally recognized tribe. That means the government does not see us as Native people. So I'm a figment of your imagination. I do not exist. So in all of that time, we find out that there's these histories that happen right here on this land that we live on, and we would never know who the indigenous people were unless we went and sought that out. Wherever you come from in this country, whatever land you stand on, you are on stolen land. This land was never given to what is now called the United States of America. This is a false government that is on this land. There are over 700 sovereign nations that live here, that were here before, that had names for these places, that had their own language and own spirituality. Sometimes you find in the diaries of the Spanish, when they came here, they were so good. The Catholic Church created all of these wonderful things, right? They created this way of knowing who they stole, from which village, when they got baptized, who they were forced to marry, and who their children were. So for me, I could actually really tell you my lineage all the way back to first contact and where my ancestors were originated from, because the Spanish kept those records. But we still were not considered native people here, and we can't have a voice in what happens on our own land. Probably not more than 20 years ago, people didn't even know that Ohlone people still existed. It wasn't until we created these walks to sacred sites and we began to start doing the work around sacred site protection in the Bay Area that this even happened. Over 100 years ago, this crazy guy named Nels Nelson created a map. He worked for UC Berkeley. He created a map of all of our shell mounds, our sacred sites, our burial sites in the Bay Area. Over 100 years ago, he realized that these were important places. Why? Who knows? But over 100 years ago, in 1909, he created this map because at that time, there was so much destruction and building upon this land that he knew that they would never exist again. And so he created this map of 425 of our shell mounds. Virtually none of them exist today. They're all under cement and asphalt and buildings and railroad tracks and bars and schools. But still, in 2005 to through 2009, we walked those shell mounds from Vallejo down to San Jose, up to San Francisco, praying at these sacred sites that still held our ancestors. Thousands of our ancestors stay in cardboard boxes and lockers at UC Berkeley, San Francisco State. There's universities and museums all over the Bay Area hoarding my ancestors and not allowing us to put them back into the ground. So we have to fight for these places that are special to us, that are important, because we are, after all, still human beings. No matter where you come from in this world, wherever you originate from, there was original teachings about how you were supposed to be in space and place. What your relationship is to that land, what your obligation is. We have obligations still to pray at these sacred places, to pass that on to our children and our grandchildren. For the healing of this land, and not just for us, but for whoever now lives in our territory. It has been because of the allies and accomplices in our lifetime that have come together to put this word out that we still exist, that has helped the Ohlone people all together exist in this kind of a way. 20 years ago or so, I probably wouldn't have been invited to sit on a panel to talk to you guys or to have an acknowledgement of whose land we were on. So we've come a long way, and we've got a long way to go still. I think one of the crazy things that happened was I think it was, I don't remember what year it was. There was this movie called Avatar. You guys remember that movie? And I went with my cousins to watch it, and I was so shook up and crying by the end of that film, because it talked exactly about the colonization that happened on our land when our children were told to go to school and taught this other language, and all the things that changed in those blue people's lives was exactly what happens when Imperial USA comes into lands and takes them over. Any government that takes over other people's lands. I offer that you guys watch that movie again in a different
One of my
view.
favorites.
Because it really talks about that in a different kind of way. I think that my cousins weren't woke at the time, and they were like, what is wrong with you, right? I was like, Jesus Christ, don't you see? So to speak, yeah. Anyway, so we've been doing a lot of work. We did those walks, and I think that the ancestors really created this way for us to be inside of this land again and to really give us, actually, I felt like it was a test. It was like, here's this test, do these walks for 5 years, and see what happens. So without any government money, without anything else, it was because we all decided we were going to do this. My friend Janella LaRose came back from Ground Zero walk with our friends that are Nippon Mahoji Buddhist monks and said, I got this great idea, let's do a walk. And I was ignorant, and I said, yeah, let's do it. And so we got together with our friends, and we took Nelson's map, and we put it together. We found out where all these shell mounds were in 3 weeks. And we created this walk that went around the Bay Area, and we stopped at these places, walking 18 miles a day, stopping at these places for prayer, staying at churches, camping out, doing that for 3 weeks. And we did that for 5 years, and just did that. And in that time, we were able to educate a lot of people in the Bay Area about who the heck Ohlone people were, what the hell a shell mound was, and why it was important for us to keep this alive. And after doing those walks, during those walks, we met a Wounded Knee de Ocampo, who was a Miwok man who grew up and lived in Vallejo his whole entire life. And there were 2 shell mounds on the last 15 acres of open land along the Carquinez Strait that was owned by the Vallejo Recreation District, which is a separate entity from the city of Vallejo. In 2011, the city of Vallejo was about to file bankruptcy and gave the Park District $40,000 worth of permits for free in order to complete this project that we have been fighting against for 12 and a half years. And so we put out a call to people to come, and we thought we were going to get arrested that same day, or at least that weekend, and we didn't. We lit a sacred fire that lasted 109 days with 4 other fires going around the world at the same time. And people from all walks of life came and offered prayers and did ceremony and brought firewood and food. And so we talk about this standing rock that happened when we had a small one right here in our own backyard. And we met so many allies and accomplices at that time. And we've been doing this work to save and preserve and protect this site. And I think right now it's more important for me because I have grandchildren, that those grandchildren know where these places and spaces are, that we still take them to these places and pray, that the language is coming back through dreams and through my daughter's education, that we begin to do these things. And so this is the kind of work, and how does this work tie into everybody else? Because it is a work of resistance, because we are not supposed to exist. The colonial project tried to wipe us out through genocide, through erasure, through history books, through telling us that we didn't exist or belong anymore on our own lands. To wake up every single day on my own territory and to know that this government that took it over doesn't acknowledge us or our sacred places is a horrific thing to have to deal with every day. To know with all of this development that's going on, with the 5 or 6 different 26-story buildings happening right here in downtown Oakland, to know that they may hit some of our burial sites at any time and not think about having to do anything but continue to build. We are working on the West Berkeley Shellmound right now. A little 2.2 acres of land that now is capped by a parking lot that is still sacred because it is the first of the 425 shell mounds that ring the Bay Area. It was the first place that my ancestors put a fishing line into the bay. The very first place that babies cried along the bay. The very first place that there was a burial site created. So for me, everything that happens on this territory, whether we're fighting for the indigenous rights of Palestinians, or my brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico, or for Black Lives Matters, or for the LGBTQ folks that are here with us, whatever the issue is, we are related because you are on our territory. We share this land now, and it's important for us to remember the sacredness of what we do in our work. When we look back at all of the great leaders, we know that there was a spiritual connection that they had, that they come from this way. And I think that when I began to do these talks recently, it began to start talking about what is our spiritual connection? How do we have that connection with ourselves so that we can do the work, that we can continue to do this work and sustain ourselves in different kinds of ways?